I'm a 26-year-old woman, and my cousin Clara has always been the kind of person who can't stand when the spotlight isn't on her. At every family event, she somehow finds a way to shift the attention back to herself. If someone is talking about a new job, suddenly she's had that job before and knows all about it. If someone starts a new hobby, Clara will loudly announce that she's been doing it for years, even if you know she just Googled it the night before. It's been like this for as long as I can remember, but most people just roll their eyes and let her carry on because it's easier than arguing. I've been with my boyfriend Daniel for 2 years now. He's nothing like the kind of guys Clara usually brings around. She always goes for flashy, loud, short-lived boyfriends who love the attention just as much as she does. Daniel is steady, kind, thoughtful, and he fits in with my family in a way that surprised even me. Everyone likes him. He helps clear the table without being asked, listens when my uncles ramble about fishing trips, and always remembers little details about people. My grandma adores him, but that attention he gets has never sat well with Clara. She'll toss out a flirty comment or nudge his arm when no one's looking, always under the disguise of a joke. But I've noticed. At Thanksgiving last year, Clara made one of those jokes louder than usual. While everyone was sitting around the table, she laughed and said that Daniel would make the perfect husband. People chuckled, thinking it was harmless, but the way she said it felt pointed. Daniel just smiled politely and didn't respond, but I caught the look in her eye. That was the first time I felt like her behavior might become more than just attention-seeking. A few weeks later, I started getting texts from relatives congratulating me on an engagement. Except, they weren't congratulating me. They were congratulating Clara. My phone kept lighting up with messages, and at first I thought it was some kind of mistake. But then my mom called, sounding half excited and half confused. She told me Clara had announced at brunch that she was engaged, but wouldn't say who the fiancé was. She made it into this big mystery. That alone was strange, but then another relative casually said to me, "Well, obviously she meant Daniel, right? Who else could it be?" That line stopped me cold. My cousin, my own cousin, had apparently told the family she was engaged, and somehow people thought the man she was engaged to was my boyfriend. I remember just sitting there trying to process how ridiculous it sounded, until I asked Daniel about it. He was blindsided. He had no idea what I was talking about and thought I was joking at first. When he realized I was serious, he was just as shocked as I was. Not long after, Clara started posting pictures on social media of rings. Not professional photos or anything, just her hand with some costume jewelry that looked inexpensive and poorly made. She angled them to look like engagement photos, captioned them with vague things like "so lucky" and "forever starts now," but never once mentioned who the guy was. My family group chat lit up with people congratulating her. Some asked questions, but Clara dodged every one of them. She would just hint that her fiancé was someone everyone already knows and adores, which only made things worse. Every hint pointed straight at Daniel. Then the invitations came. Clara sent out texts inviting everyone to an intimate engagement dinner at a restaurant. The same restaurant Daniel had taken me to for my birthday just months before. That detail made it feel deliberate, like she wanted to twist the knife. I didn't want to go. The thought of sitting through a fake celebration built on a lie made me sick. But Daniel didn't agree. He told me we needed to go, that skipping it would only make it look like we were hiding something. He wanted to shut the whole thing down once and for all, so we agreed. We would walk in together, side by side, hand in hand, and face whatever Clara had planned. We didn't know what was waiting for us at that dinner, but one thing was certain: the lie couldn't go on forever. When the night of the dinner came, Daniel parked the car right outside the restaurant. It was one of those places with soft lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, candles already glowing through the windows. The moment we stepped out, hand in hand, I could feel eyes on us before we even walked through the doors. A couple of relatives were gathered in the entryway, and their expressions shifted instantly when they saw us together. One of my cousins actually blinked like he was trying to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Inside, the restaurant was buzzing. The staff moved quickly between tables, balancing trays of drinks and plates. Clara had picked a long dining room with a row of tables pushed together to fit everyone. Right at the end, where the best view of the room was, sat Clara. She was dressed in a white cocktail dress that looked one shade away from a wedding gown. A wide grin plastered across her face as she leaned toward the guests around her. She looked every bit like a bride holding court, until she spotted us. Her smile faltered mid-laugh. For a moment she froze, one hand suspended near her glass. The pause was brief but noticeable. Then she forced out a laugh, louder than before, pretending nothing had changed. But the shift in the room was immediate. Heads turned, conversations dropped into whispers, and people's eyes darted between Daniel and Clara like they were watching a storm about to break. We walked forward. Daniel didn't rush. He kept his grip firm in mine, shoulders squared, calm as ever. Clara's mother was the first to react. She stood up from her seat halfway down the table and rushed toward us with exaggerated excitement. Her voice carried across the whole room as she congratulated Daniel in a way that made it clear who she thought he was supposed to be standing beside. The timing couldn't have been worse. Everyone heard it. Daniel didn't flinch. He waited until the room quieted, and then, in a steady voice that carried without needing to be loud, he introduced himself as my boyfriend of 2 years. There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice, just clear words that landed heavily in the silence. The effect was instant. The chatter stopped. A few glasses clinked against plates as people set them down too quickly. Across the table, Clara's hand was resting on the surface, and that's when I noticed her ring. It wasn't subtle. She kept adjusting her fingers, angling the light so it caught on the cheap, shiny band. It didn't look like an engagement ring. It looked like something bought last minute from a fast fashion store, slightly too big for her hand. The stone wobbled as she fidgeted with it. One of my uncles broke the silence without meaning to. His voice carried from a few seats away, asking who exactly the fiancé was supposed to be. The question rippled down the table. Heads turned. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Clara's grin faltered again. She laughed nervously and muttered something about her real fiancé being delayed at work. She didn't even try to give details. A few cousins exchanged looks. One of them raised an eyebrow, another leaned back with arms crossed. They didn't say anything, but the skepticism was plain. No one outright challenged her, but the silence that followed was louder than words. Daniel guided me toward two empty chairs placed directly across from Clara at the head of the table. He pulled mine out first, letting me sit before he took his. From where we sat, Clara couldn't avoid looking at us. Every time her eyes drifted to Daniel, she caught sight of me beside him. The waiter came around then, setting down glasses of champagne for a toast. Only half the table lifted their glasses. The rest hesitated, their eyes bouncing between Clara and the empty space where her supposed fiancé was supposed to sit. The clinking was uneven, the energy strained. Clara's father stepped in, trying to patch the cracks. He leaned forward and asked when the wedding would be taking place. The question caught Clara mid-sip, and she almost spilled her drink before blurting out a date 6 months away. It was quick, almost too quick, like she'd been holding a backup excuse ready. But then someone asked where the venue was, and her face tightened. She stumbled over her words, naming a place that didn't even make sense for the size of the family. Another cousin pressed for details, and she dodged the questions by waving her hand and laughing about working out the kinks. I stayed quiet for most of it, watching the room unravel around her. At one point, I leaned toward Daniel and mentioned a trip we had taken together, describing the restaurant we'd been to, and how Daniel had insisted on ordering dessert even though we were full. The memory slipped naturally into the conversation, but it wasn't just for the story. It was a reminder to everyone listening of the history Daniel and I actually had together. Clara heard it too. Her hand tightened around her champagne glass until her knuckles turned pale. The rest of the night unfolded under that heavy tension. The clink of cutlery against plates sounded louder than normal. Conversations broke into small clusters, some people whispering at one end of the table while others stared openly at Clara's empty chair beside her. She kept her smile plastered on, but it never reached her eyes again. Each question, each sideways glance chipped away at her performance. By dessert, the energy in the room had shifted completely. The celebration Clara tried to stage had turned into something else entirely. It was no longer about her engagement. It was about the giant hole in her story, the one she couldn't patch no matter how much she laughed or waved it off. And through it all, Daniel never once let go of my hand. By the time the entrees were cleared away, the empty chair beside Clara had become the loudest thing in the room. Every few minutes, someone's eyes flicked toward it, waiting for a man to appear. The minutes stretched, and it became obvious. No fiancé was showing up. The tension grew heavy enough that finally one of my cousins cracked a joke about Daniel being in 2 places at once. The words landed like a stone in water. Some people forced out nervous laughter. Others stared down at their plates, but the implication hung there. Everyone knew who the fiancé was supposed to be. Clara tried to laugh along, but it came out sharp and brittle. She pushed her plate away even though she'd barely touched her food and excused herself from the table. The click of her heels faded down the hallway toward the bathrooms. A hush followed her departure, broken only by the clinking of glasses and low murmurs. I waited a minute before getting up. I didn't announce where I was going. I just slipped away and followed. The hallway outside the restroom was empty, but Clara's voice carried through the thin door. She was snapping into her phone, sharp words spilling out about keeping the story straight and making sure nobody slips up. There was no trace of her dinner party charm left in her tone. It was raw panic. When the door opened suddenly, she nearly collided with me. Her eyes widened, then narrowed just as fast. She didn't bother pretending. She accused me right there in the hallway of ruining everything, of showing up just to humiliate her. The words came rapid, like she'd been rehearsing them. I kept my voice steady. I told her there was nothing to ruin. She had built this entire spectacle on Daniel's name, and the cracks were already showing. She fired back that she only borrowed his name for a little attention, that it wasn't supposed to go this far, that everyone would have moved on if I hadn't come. She actually called it harmless. I reminded her that people in the room genuinely believed Daniel was her fiancé. They had congratulated her, toasted her, even started planning around her lie. That wasn't harmless anymore. It was spiraling. For the first time that night, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She just glared at me, jaw tight, before brushing past and storming back toward the table. When we returned, the air was brittle. Clara slid into her chair and immediately launched into damage control. She laughed too loudly, waved her hand, and told everyone it was a big misunderstanding. She claimed she never once named Daniel, that people were twisting her words. A few heads nodded uncertainly, but most looked unconvinced. Daniel set his glass down firmly and spoke just loud enough to cut through the room. He reminded everyone of Clara's Thanksgiving comment, the one where she had joked in front of the entire family that he would make the perfect husband. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Faces shifted. Several relatives who had chuckled at that joke back then were now piecing together the thread from that moment to tonight. An aunt, sitting 2 seats down, suddenly sighed and admitted she had already bought Clara an engagement gift. She looked down at the tablecloth, visibly upset that she'd wasted her money and her emotions on what was starting to look like a fabrication. Clara's smile froze, the corners twitching as if she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her father muttered something under his breath, loud enough that most of the table heard. It wasn't the first time, he said. Not the first time Clara had manufactured drama and dragged the family into it. His voice carried a mix of frustration and resignation. Across the table, Clara's siblings sat stone still, eyes downcast, cheeks flushed red. None of them jumped in to defend her. The evening unraveled from there. Conversation splintered into hushed tones. A couple of relatives pushed back their chairs and left quietly, murmuring about early mornings and long drives, though the discomfort was obvious. The clink of silverware dulled, Laughter vanished, and all that remained was a heavy awkwardness. Clara kept trying to pull it back with forced stories and bright smiles, but no one was buying it anymore. When the check finally came, it was almost a relief. People scattered, leaving behind half-finished glasses and untouched plates. Clara lingered at the table, her hands tight around her phone, her face pale but still set in a brittle smile. That night, after Daniel and I got home, my phone lit up with a long text from Clara. The paragraph stretched on, filled with accusations. She wrote that I had stolen her moment, that I had walked in holding Daniel's hand just to destroy her. She claimed I was jealous, that I couldn't stand to see her happy, that I humiliated her in front of the entire family on purpose. The words blurred together into one long rant, but the message was clear. In her mind, none of it was her fault. The morning after the dinner, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls stacked up from my mom, one after the other. By the time I called her back, she was already mid-question, demanding to know what had happened the night before. She had heard pieces, whispers from relatives who left early, mentions of Daniel, mentions of Clara walking out red-faced, but not the whole story. I laid it out for her. Clara had staged an entire engagement dinner with Daniel as the implied fiancé. She had paraded around in white, dropped hints, and leaned on that ring until the lie cracked wide open in front of everyone. My mom went quiet on the other end of the line. Then she admitted Clara's parents were furious. Not at Clara for spinning the lie, but at me for embarrassing her. According to them, if I hadn't shown up, Clara wouldn't have been embarrassed in front of everyone. Later, when the heat of her first reaction faded, my mom spoke softer. She admitted she didn't actually believe Clara's story herself. She had seen her daughter's antics before, but she felt trapped between keeping peace with Clara's parents and acknowledging the truth. Her words hung in the air. Stay neutral, don't make it worse. Meanwhile, the cousins were anything but neutral. By lunchtime, a brand new group chat had sprung up. Its name? Phantom Fiancé. The chat blew up with memes, jokes, and sarcastic takes about Clara's invisible groom. Someone posted a picture of an empty chair with a champagne glass and wrote, "Sorry I'm late, traffic was terrible." Another cousin joked about Clara marrying a ghost. The humor spread fast, and it was clear, Clara's attempt to be the center of attention had turned her into the punchline. But not everyone laughed. A few relatives reached out to me privately. Some thanked me for walking in with Daniel and setting the record straight, saying it cleared the confusion before things went too far. Others were not so kind. One message scolded me for making a scene, insisting I should have stayed away to avoid drama. Apparently, the blame was easier to throw at the person who disrupted the lie than the one who created it. Daniel stayed calm through it all. When I replayed the text to him, he just shook his head and told me I hadn't caused anything. Clara had. He reminded me that showing up together only revealed the truth that was already there. Nothing more. Clara, of course, had her own version. She began messaging relatives with long rants about me. In her version, I was jealous, desperate, and couldn't stand to see her happy. She painted me as the villain who came storming into her celebration with the intention of destroying her moment. The problem was, she repeated this enough times that a few relatives started asking questions again. One of my aunts reached out and told me Clara insisted her fiancé was real, just a very private person who didn't like family drama. That was why he hadn't shown up, she claimed. That was why no one had met him. Clara's story shifted into secrecy, banking on the idea that people would be too polite to push harder. But I couldn't shake what I had overheard outside the bathroom. The phone call about keeping the story straight. It didn't sound like a woman protecting a shy fiancé. It sounded like someone scrambling to maintain a lie. The longer I thought about it, the more I doubted a fiancé even existed at all. Daniel advised me to ignore it. He said Clara was throwing smoke bombs to keep people guessing, and if we kept chasing her lies, we'd only get dragged deeper. I wanted to agree, but I also knew how persuasive Clara could be when she wanted the spotlight. By Sunday, another family lunch was on the calendar. I debated skipping it, but Daniel suggested we go as usual. When we arrived, Clara wasn't there yet. She strolled in nearly 40 minutes late, her hair slightly messy, her shoulders sagging as if she had just come from a long day. She dropped into her chair with a sigh loud enough for the whole table to hear and announced she was exhausted from wedding planning stress. The cousins traded looks, some biting back smiles, others outright smirking. Clara kept going, spinning vague anecdotes about her fiancé's demanding career and how he was always busy. She never gave a job title, never offered details, just broad strokes designed to sound impressive without being specific. She also made a point of sitting as far from Daniel as possible. She busied herself with chatting to relatives at the opposite end of the table, her eyes darting away whenever ours met. It was obvious she wanted to steer attention anywhere but in our direction. The conversation limped along until one cousin casually asked to see a picture of the mysterious fiancé. The question was innocent enough, but it hit Clara like a dart. She coughed into her napkin, exaggerated and sudden, then waved the question away. She muttered something about her phone battery being dead, then quickly switched to another topic entirely. The deflection was clumsy, and the silence that followed was telling. People leaned back in their chairs, brows raised, lips pressed together to hide smirks. No one bought it. And in that moment, it became clear that Clara's performance was collapsing in slow motion. Each excuse chipped away at the image she was trying to hold together, and each vague claim only deepened the suspicion that there was no fiancé at all. About a week after the awkward Sunday lunch, I got a message from one of my cousins. It wasn't in the big family chat, but sent directly to me, short and to the point. I think I know who Clara's fiancé is supposed to be. She explained that a friend of hers had seen Clara on a dating app not long ago. Clara had matched with a guy who lived in another city, a couple of hours away. The cousin sent me his name, and within minutes I found his profile through mutual connections on social media. His pictures were public. He was clearly single, posting about his dog, his workouts, and his weekend trips with friends. Not one post had Clara in it, not even a stray comment. The more I scrolled, the clearer it became. The only trace of her was in the comment section. Clara had been leaving heart emojis, my love comments, even writing things like "can't wait for forever with you." The guy had never replied, not once. The silence on his end said everything. It didn't take long for screenshots to make their way into the family group chat. One cousin dropped them in without context, just the images of Clara gushing in comments under posts from a man who clearly had no idea what story was being told in her family. The chat blew up instantly. Some people reacted with laughing emojis, others asked blunt questions, and a few simply went quiet. The picture was obvious now. Clara had invented an engagement with someone who didn't even know. Clara scrambled. She typed long messages about how they were keeping things private because her fiancé didn't like the spotlight. She repeated the line that he didn't want his personal life dragged into family drama, and that everyone needed to respect boundaries. A few relatives gave polite thumbs-up reactions, but most didn't respond at all. The silence spoke volumes. The next big test came at another family dinner. Clara showed up late again, carrying a folder under her arm. After the food was served, she pulled it out with a flourish. Inside were photos, badly edited pictures of her with the man from the dating app. In one, she had pasted herself next to him on a beach, the edges around her figure sharp and unnatural. In another, they were supposedly at a restaurant, but her shadow went the wrong direction. She called them vacation pictures, placing them on the table as supposed proof. Though the edits were obvious, the cousins stared at the prints. Daniel leaned over to me and whispered that they looked like cut-and-paste collages, the kind of edits anyone could spot from a mile away. He wasn't wrong. A few cousins covered their mouths to hide smiles, while others just looked away, embarrassed for her. Finally, one of my uncles had enough. He set down his fork, leaned forward, and asked Clara outright why her fiancé never came around if they were really engaged. His tone wasn't angry, just blunt, the kind that slices through excuses. Clara's eyes welled up instantly. She burst into tears, accusing everyone of being unsupportive and jealous. She raised her voice, saying no one wanted her to be happy. The mood in the room shifted. Where people once laughed nervously or humored her, now they just exchanged wary looks. The sympathy wasn't there anymore. The crying didn't draw the reaction she was hoping for. The exhaustion was written across everyone's faces. That night, after the dinner ended, Clara sent a long message to the entire group chat. She declared that she and her fiancé had decided to distance themselves from family events because of the toxic negativity. She ended it with a line about choosing happiness and protecting her relationship. A few relatives sent short replies wishing her well, but most ignored it. To me, it was obvious what she was doing. If she stopped showing up, she wouldn't have to keep proving the lie. With distance, maybe people would forget or stop asking questions. It was a stalling tactic. But a few days later, the plan backfired. The man himself messaged one of my cousins. He had somehow gotten wind of being linked to engagement posts, probably from mutuals who saw Clara's comments and connected the dots. His message was short and confused. He had no idea why Clara was claiming him, and he wanted it to stop. The cousin immediately shared his message in the group chat. It was the confirmation everyone needed. Clara had dragged a stranger into her story without his knowledge or consent. After that, things escalated. Clara's parents, who had been defending her loudly until now, suddenly went quiet. Within a day, they sent out a notice for a family meeting at their house. They wrote that it was important to clear the air and put an end to the drama before it tore the family apart. Everyone knew what it really was: damage control. The family meeting was set for a Saturday evening at Clara's parents' house. The invite had gone out to practically everyone: cousins, uncles, aunts, even family friends who had been pulled into the mess through the endless engagement talk. The wording of the message made it clear. They wanted this settled once and for all. Daniel and I debated going. I was tempted to stay out of it and let Clara talk herself into a corner, but Daniel reminded me that avoiding it would only give her more room to spin the story. So we drove over together. Clara was outside when we arrived. She was pacing in the driveway, her hair disheveled, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She clutched her phone like it was a lifeline, glancing at the screen every few seconds as though she was waiting for someone to call. When she saw us, her face crumpled even more, and she turned her back quickly, wiping at her eyes. It was obvious she was waiting for someone who was never going to show. Inside, the living room was already crowded. Chairs had been pulled in from the dining room, the couch was filled, and people lined the walls. The low hum of whispering cut off when Clara's father walked in. He cleared his throat and said they were gathered because the situation had gotten out of hand. His voice was calm but strained. He turned to Clara, urging her to explain herself. Clara took her spot near the fireplace, clutching tissues. For a moment, she just cried softly, then finally began speaking. She said she had spoken too soon, that she had been misunderstood. She insisted she never meant to lie, that things had simply gotten blown out of proportion. She painted herself as overwhelmed, cornered by gossip. One of my aunts wasn't having it. She leaned forward in her chair and bluntly asked if Clara was engaged at all. Her voice cut through the excuses, pointing out how much confusion had been caused by Clara's announcement, her party, and her vague posts online. Clara's tears flowed harder. She claimed she had been celebrating her relationship, not an official engagement, and that people had twisted her excitement into something else. She held up her hands as if to say she was innocent, that the misunderstanding wasn't her fault. I spoke up then, calmly but firmly. I reminded everyone that Clara had hosted a full engagement dinner. She had dressed in white, flashed a ring, and given a toast. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was an entire staged event. The murmurs in the room grew louder, heads nodding. Then one cousin added fuel to the fire. He reminded everyone that the supposed fiancé had reached out privately, denying any involvement at all. He had never been part of Clara's story. The words landed like a hammer. Clara froze, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her mother jumped in quickly, trying to soften the blow. She said Clara had been under stress, that the pressure of watching everyone else move forward in their lives had made her act out. She asked everyone to show compassion, but the room didn't buy it. Relatives exchanged looks of frustration. Some folded their arms, others shook their heads. Daniel stood then. His voice was steady, carrying across the room. He said Clara was not to use his name or connection to the family in her stories again. He said it clearly. No anger, just fact. Several relatives nodded in agreement, their support visible and immediate. That's when Clara snapped. Her tears turned into rage. She screamed that I had stolen Daniel from her, that I had destroyed her chance at happiness. Her words spilled fast and loud, accusing me of stepping into a role that should have been hers. The room went silent. Shock rippled through the family. No one had expected her to say it outright, but there it was, an open admission that she had considered Daniel hers, even though he had never shown her an ounce of interest. Clara's father dropped his head into his hands. Her siblings sat stiffly, their eyes fixed on the floor. The rest of the family just stared, caught between disbelief and discomfort. Without warning, Clara bolted. She shoved past the crowd, ran out the door, and disappeared into the night. The slam of the door echoed through the house, leaving everyone stunned in her wake. For the first time, the entire family was forced to confront the truth, not just about her lie, but about the depth of her fiscation. After Clara stormed out of the family meeting, the room stayed frozen for a few moments. No one moved, no one spoke, until finally the quiet cracked into overlapping voices. Aunts and uncles began talking at once, venting frustrations that had clearly been bottled up for years. They listed off past stunts, moments when Clara had exaggerated, stirred drama, or twisted stories until the rest of the family was left cleaning up the fallout. The anger wasn't just about last night, it was about the years of enabling her behavior. Clara's father rubbed his face with both hands before finally speaking. His voice was heavy, admitting that the lies had gone too far. He said the family had always brushed things off, excusing Clara as dramatic, letting her antics slide to avoid conflict. But this, he said, had reached a point where no one could deny the damage anymore. Heads around the room nodded in agreement. The conversation turned from venting to decision-making. Relatives agreed that unless Clara came forward honestly and took responsibility, they weren't going to entertain her stories anymore. No more humoring her, no more pretending for the sake of peace. The line had to be drawn. Daniel stood then, steady as always. His voice was calm but carried weight. He reminded everyone that this wasn't just an embarrassing spectacle. It had been a direct violation of our relationship. Clara had used his name, his presence, and tied him into a false story that risked his reputation. The family listened closely, his words settling into the room like an anchor. One cousin suggested that boundaries were the only way forward. Until Clara showed honesty, she would be kept at a distance. The idea spread quickly, heads nodding, murmurs of agreement rising from all corners of the room. The decision wasn't official, but it was clear. The family was tired of being dragged into Clara's drama. The days that followed were quiet in comparison. The once busy family group chat slowed to a crawl. No ring pictures, no vague my love posts, no dramatic updates from Clara. And for the first time in a long while, no one was chasing her down for explanations. Instead, I started getting private messages from cousins. They thanked me for standing firm at the dinner, for walking in with Daniel, for not letting Clara's version of the story go unchallenged. Several admitted they had seen through her lies before, but never felt brave enough to call her out. They were glad someone finally had. The true shift came at the next family gathering, a cousin's birthday party held in a backyard with fairy lights strung between trees and tables covered in food. Clara didn't show. Her absence was noticeable, but not in the way she would have wanted. The mood was lighter, conversations easier. People laughed without glancing around to see if she was about to interrupt. For once, no one was walking on eggshells. Daniel was welcomed warmly. Relatives greeted him with jokes, pulled him into conversations, asked about his work and hobbies without hesitation. The tension that had hung around him since Clara's announcement was gone. It was as though the cloud had lifted, and he could finally just be part of the family without suspicion hanging over him. I noticed it too. The flow of conversation was smoother. Stories carried through without being hijacked. There were no awkward pauses waiting for Clara to insert herself. People stayed longer, laughing, drinking, enjoying each other's company in a way that had been missing for years. At one point during the party, Clara's father approached me quietly. He didn't make a scene, didn't raise his voice. He admitted he had been wrong to blame me at first. He said he had wanted to protect his daughter, but realized now that his protection had allowed her lies to grow unchecked. He promised it wouldn't happen again. I accepted the apology, but I made it clear that Daniel and I would not tolerate being dragged into another story. If Clara tried to triangulate us again, there would be no quiet nodding along. He nodded, eyes heavy, and agreed. As the night wound down, I looked around and realized something important. The family wasn't fractured. They were moving on. With Clara absent, the rest of us were able to connect without the constant pull of her theatrics. It felt like genuine closure, not because she had confessed, but because everyone else had finally stopped playing along. Months later, Daniel proposed. It wasn't a spectacle, just the two of us on a quiet evening. But when the news spread through the family, the response was overwhelming. The celebration that followed was filled with joy, laughter, and sincerity. No whispers about stolen fiancés, no shadow of Clara's games, just real support, genuine excitement, and happiness shared without doubt. And for the first time, the spotlight was on something true.